Hello, my name is Gage, and today I'm going to be talking about the recession of the early 80s and 2008, what Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama did to help alleviate the economic situation during these recessions, whether John Maynard Keynes or F.A. von Hayek would approve of their actions, and which president I think did a better job at repairing the economy. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Ronald Reagan. The recession of the early 1980s. Big problem. Inflation is crazy high. We're talking around 11.8% inflation rate. The Federal Reserve has a plan though, don't worry. They're going to use stop-and-go monetary policy. Stop-and-go monetary policy takes turns fighting high inflation and low employment. During the stop, inflation was too high. The Federal Reserve raises the interest rate. During the go, unemployment is too high. The Federal Reserve lowers the interest rate and loosens the money supply. This plan was terrible. It was incredibly unstable in the long run because if inflation and unemployment rose at the same time, there was nothing the Federal Reserve could do. Ruh-roh, inflation and unemployment raised at the same time. What are we gonna do? I'll tell you what we're gonna do, said Paul Volcker, who was made the chairman of the Federal Reserve for his inflation views. We're gonna focus on stopping inflation because that is gonna cause us the most problems if we don't do anything. He then shifted the Federal Reserve's policy to focus on the money supply rather than interest rates. He did this because A, the mounting inflation made picking the right interest rate difficult, and B, it signaled to the public that the Federal Reserve is serious about low inflation. Unfortunately, this did not work the first time and the economy fell into a recession in 1981, but Volcker was persistent. Then, in 1982, inflation fell to 5% and long-run interest rates were declining. After this, there were a few inflation scares, but thanks to the hard work of Volcker and his successors, the inflation rate did not hit the double digits for the rest of the 80s. So, during the recession, the unemployment rate and inflation was high, and the GDP kept spiking and falling until 1982. Ronald Reagan's presidential actions. Before we get into specific fiscal and monetary action, let's talk about the wonderful world of Reaganomics. Reaganomics was rooted in supply-side economics. Basically, cut taxes to give companies more cash. With more cash, the companies can afford to hire more workers. With more workers, the business can expand, and it gives workers more incentive to work if there's more money, increasing labor. This was also called trickle-down economics. Reaganomics prioritized tax cuts, reducing tax rates, unemployment, and government regulations. Inflation was lowered through monetary policy. It all worked in the 1980s because it lowered the record high taxes. Although government spending did not decrease, it was just shifted from domestic government programs, like Medicare, to defense, the military. It almost tripled the federal debt from $998 million to $2.857 billion from 1981 to 1989. Reagan believed and followed Volcker and his plan, the Economic Recovery Act of 1981. It reformed the tax code and reduced marginal tax rates. It also marked a departure from the liberal tax policy associated with Keynesian economic theory and the earlier tendencies of the Republican Party. Tax reform of 1986. It lowered taxes. Lowered the top rate tax for ordinary income from 50% to 28% and raised the bottom tax rate from 11% to 15%. It also eliminated the distinction between long-term capital gains and ordinary income, mandating that they got taxed at the same rate. They raised the maximum tax rate on long-term capital gains from 20% to 20%. Before the act took place, the marginal rate on net long-term capital gain was only 40% of the marginal tax rate on other forms of income under the previous tax laws. Corporate taxes were lowered from 50% to 35%. So, Reagan lowered federal taxes, tightened the money supply, limited government spending from 10% to 1%, and reduced government regulations. These are all traits of a supply-side economist. Von Hayek would agree with his policies. Chapter 2. Barack Obama. The recession of 2008. The recession was caused by the United States housing bubble bursting. Banks had low interest rates, which allowed for people who usually couldn't afford it to get mortgages and buy houses. Because of the new demand in the housing market, the price of housing went up. In 2005, interest rates began to rise and demand and house prices began to fall. This was unfortunate, because people who bought a house when interest rates were low now couldn't afford their mortgage, but also couldn't sell their house for profit because the house prices were going down. As foreclosures increased, banks stopped lending to subprime customers, further reducing demand and prices. Speaking of banks, they were in hot water because most of their assets were given away to people who now couldn't pay them back. Banks also didn't trust each other's credit, which led to financially healthy customers and businesses to get turned away. Businesses had to reduce expenses and investments, leading to job loss and reduced demand. Many banks had to file for bankruptcy or ask the government to bail them out. Consumer confidence plummeted, understandably so, and people started to save money in anticipation for a hard time. This further hurt the economy. During the recession, which officially began in 2007, the GDP declined 4.3%. Unemployment increased from 5% to 9.5%, peaking at 10% in October 2009. The poverty rate in America increased from 12.5% to more than 15%. Sounds very similar to the beginning of another economic tragedy that I've heard of. The name's slipping my mind right now. It's the tip of my tongue, though. Maybe I'll remember later and add it. Barack Obama's presidential action. It's now time for me to introduce you all to my new favorite word to say. Obamanomics. Okay, now we can discuss what this means. Obamanomics wanted to increase government spending, reduce energy use, tax adjustments in lower tax rates for higher income families, and the Federal Reserve eased the money supply. Some specific things that Obama put into place were the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which tried to create new jobs and preserve existing ones, invest in America's infrastructure, and give aid to state and local governments, and give tax relief. The Tax Relief, Unemployment Insurance Reauthorization, and Job Creation Act of 2010. Large families got more money, families who had children got reduced income taxes, the American Opportunity Tax Credit gave 3 times more relief than the previous HOPE credit, and extended unemployment insurance by 13 months. Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act created new government agencies who look at the financial system and a Financial Stability Oversight Council and Orderly Liquidation Authority that made sure large and important firms did not fail. The new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau helps prevent predatory mortgage lending and helps new customers understand the terms of their mortgage before they sign it. New Volcker Rule limits how banks can invest, speculative trading, and eliminates proprietary trading. Securities and Exchange make sure agencies provide meaningful and reliable credit ratings of the businesses, municipalities, and other entities they may evaluate. The updated whistleblower program included mandatory bounties of up to 10% to 30% of the proceeds of the litigation settlement. More employees are covered by their businesses, like sister companies and such, and the statute of limitations to claim against your employer have been extended. The Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012. The tax cuts from 2001 to 2010 are now permanent, put into place to try to avoid a fiscal cliff. It raised payroll taxes, using a combo of spending cuts and tax increases. Actions taken with the auto industry. The auto industry was hit unusually hard by the recession of 2008 and needed a lot of help to get out of it. The Auto Task Force was created to oversee the rebuilding of the auto industry. Additional financial support was given to the industry, about $62 billion in federal loans, managed bankruptcies, minimized disruptions, and ensured companies would come back leaner and more competitive with other companies. United Auto Workers agreed to significant wage and benefit concessions. We started emphasizing the modernizing of the car industry with CARS, Car Allowance Rebate System, which got people to trade in their old, less fuel-efficient cars for new ones. This also stimulated the demand for more cars. So, Obama raised some taxes, loosened the money supply, increased government spending, and increased government regulations. Obama was a Keynesian economist. Keynes would agree with him more than he would Reagan. Chapter 3. Who did the better job? I believe that the president who got out of their respective recession better is Obama. I think that when we compare both the recession of the early 80s and the recession of 2008, that the recession of 2008 was way worse. It was very similar to the beginning of the Great Depression, and it was deeper, global, and hurt households, financial systems, and economic stability more. Obama may have taken a longer time to get his GDP to rise than Reagan, but his solution helped the GDP more long term. Also, because it was global, Obama didn't just save the American economy from collapsing, he also saved many other countries as well. That was my comparison of the recession of the early 80s and 2008, and how I felt that both presidents, Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, dealt with them, and why I felt that Barack Obama dealt with his recession better. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.